The papers were already spread across her kitchen table when her son Dale set his coffee mug down on top of them without even looking. Not on the counter, on the papers. Edna Mee Calloway watched the ring of moisture bloom through the corner of a document that had taken her 4 days to gather: her husband Walter's death certificate, the property assessment, the 1987 deed she had found in the cedar chest upstairs, and she did not say a word. She was 74 years old. She had grown quiet the way rivers grow quiet before something breaks downstream. "Mother," her daughter Renee said from the doorway, arms folded, voice carrying the particular patience people use when they have already made a decision and are waiting for you to catch up. "You're not being realistic. The property taxes alone are going to eat what's left by spring." Dale pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, the way men do when they want a room to feel the weight of their arrival. He slid a separate set of papers across the table, a real estate offer, pre-signed, with a number printed on it that Edna Mee didn't look at for a long moment. "We're not trying to hurt you," he said. He had the decency, at least, not to smile. Outside the window, past the faded screen and the empty bird feeder Walter had built from a coffee can, the land rolled away into the November hills of Polk County, Tennessee, amber and rust, and the low gray light of a sky that had not decided whether to rain. And somewhere past the tree line, past the old pasture fence, past the gravel path nobody had walked in 30 years, there was a rusted iron door set into the hillside like a forgotten promise. Edna Mee folded her hands on the table over the papers. On her right index finger, barely visible, was a small silver thimble she had been wearing since breakfast, not for any particular reason, she'd thought, just habit. She looked at the number on the document now. Then she looked at her children. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what Edna Mee Calloway found on the other side of that rusted iron door would not only change the financial reality of her remaining years, it would restore something that had been taken from her quietly over decades, in a way that left Dale and Renee and the entire Calloway family standing before a court with nothing left to say. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Edna Mee Beaumont was born on April 3, 1950, in the spare bedroom of a clapboard farmhouse outside Verbena Creek, Tennessee, a small, barely on-the-map community in Polk County that sat between the Occo River and a ridge of forested hills that the locals called the Copperheads because of the color they turned in October. Her mother, Vera Beaumont, delivered her with the help of a neighbor woman because the county road had washed out, and her father, Raymond Beaumont, was 40 miles away, driving timber. She came into the world to the sound of rain on a tin roof and the smell of cedar smoke, and she spent the first 18 years of her life learning how a woman holds things together when the ground keeps shifting beneath her feet. Her father was not a cruel man, but he was an absent one. Her mother, Vera, ran the house, the garden, the chickens, the books, and the interior life of 3 children, with the focused energy of someone who understood that no one was coming to make things easier. Vera Beaumont had a way of pressing her lips together before she spoke that meant she had considered every word and decided on the right one. Edna Mee inherited that quality entirely. She graduated from Verbena Creek High School in 1968 with marks high enough to draw a partial scholarship from a teacher's college in Cleveland, Tennessee. She spent 4 years there studying library science, not because it was expected of her, but because she had grown up with books the way other children grew up with television, and because she believed, with the particular conviction of a woman who has worked hard for everything she knows, that the right book at the right moment could alter the entire course of a person's life. She came back to Polk County in 1972 because Vera needed her. She had intended to stay 2 years. She stayed 42. She met Walter Calloway at a church potluck in August of 1973. He was 31 years old, a quiet, broad-shouldered man who worked county roads and spent his weekends fixing other people's tractors without being asked. He made her laugh on the first night by dropping a plate of 7-layer salad and then standing in the wreckage of it with such dignified seriousness that the entire fellowship hall went quiet, trying to keep from laughing with her. They were married the following June. Walter's family, his parents, Olin and Margaret Calloway, and his older brother Harlan, had never quite warmed to her. This was the kind of thing that was never stated directly. It expressed itself in small, durable ways. Margaret's habit of asking Edna Mee about her people with a tone that suggested the Beaumonts were something to be gotten past. Harlan's comments at holiday tables about how the Calloway land had always stayed in Calloway hands, as if Edna Mee were a temporary weather event. Olin died in 1989. Margaret followed in 1996. Harlan remained, now 79 years old, living in a double-wide in Bradley County with his wife Judith, who had given every impression for 30 years of considering Edna Me a category error. Edna Me worked for 37 years as the head librarian of the Verbena Creek Public Library, a small brick building on Maple Street that the county had been threatening to close, but she refused to let it die. She raised two children, Dale, born 1976, and Renee, born 1979, in the white frame house on Beaumont Road that her mother, Vera, had left to her when she passed in 2004. The property sat on 11 acres, including the old Beaumont pasture, a creek that ran dependably in all but August, and a hillside at the north end of the property that nobody had done anything with for as long as Edna Me could remember. Walter died on March 14, 2024, of congestive heart failure in the Erlanger Medical Center in Chattanooga at 6:17 in the morning. He had been declining for 2 years. Edna Me had slept in a hospital chair beside him for the last 4 nights of his life, leaving only to change her clothes at the house of a friend and returning within the hour. She was holding his hand when he went. She did not cry in the hospital. She cried once alone in the parking garage, sitting in the Buick with the windows up, and then she drove home. Walter had left behind $22,400 in a savings account, which sounded like something, until you learned that the property taxes on the Beaumont parcel were 14 months delinquent, a problem she had not known the full extent of until a certified letter arrived in April from the Polk County Tax Assessor's Office. The back taxes totaled $8,200. The interest penalties brought it to $9,847. She also discovered, going through Walter's files, that he had taken a home equity line of credit in 2019 to help Dale with a failing business, $26,000, nearly all of it still outstanding. Dale had made no payments. When Edna Me called him about it, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Dad knew the situation. We'll figure something out." They did not figure something out. By October 2024, the savings account held $214. The delinquent tax notice had advanced to a lien. The home equity line had been referred to collections. A certified letter from the tax office, dated October 29, stated that if the balance was not brought current within 90 days, the county would begin proceedings to seize the property. 90 days, roughly December 28, just past Christmas. It was at this point that Dale called, and then Renee, and then both of them together, across multiple conversations, with the persistent reasonableness of people who have already decided and are simply waiting for agreement. The offer they presented was from a land developer named Garrett Pruitt, who wanted to build a vacation rental compound on the Acco corridor. He was offering $310,000 for the property, enough to clear the debts, split what remained, and put Edna Me in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cleveland, Tennessee, closer to Renee's family. "You'd have people nearby," Renee said on the phone, in a voice that meant you wouldn't be our problem anymore. "Dale and I have already spoken to a realtor," she added, as if the consultation had been a courtesy rather than a plan. The kitchen table incident, the coffee mug, the papers, the ring of moisture blooming through the corner of the death certificate, happened on November 3rd, a Sunday afternoon when both children arrived together unannounced. Edna Me had been making soup. The house smelled of onion and thyme. She had answered the door in her work apron, and they had come inside without being invited and set their things on her chairs as though the whole proceeding were already concluded. Renee spoke for most of an hour. Dale added numbers periodically, in the way of someone who has rehearsed the financial case because it is stronger than the emotional one. He produced the offer sheet from Garrett Pruitt. He set it on the table. He put his coffee mug on her papers without looking. At the end of it, Edna Me stood up and began washing the pot that had been soaking in the sink. Her back was to them. "You'll need a few days," Renee said. This was not a question, it was an allowance. "I'll let you know," Edna Me said. Dale and Renee exchanged a look that she did not see and did not need to see. She had felt that look being exchanged behind her back for 30 years. After they left, she stood at the sink until the sound of their cars was gone. Then she dried her hands on the dish towel slowly, each finger, and went to the window and looked out at the back of the property. The November light had gone flat and gray. The old pasture fence was barely visible against the tree line, and beyond that, against the far hillside, there was the dark shape of something she had looked at for years without truly seeing. Her father, Raymond, when she was a child, had told her that the old bunker on the North Hill had been built in 1943, during the war, by the man who owned the land before her grandparents bought it, a man named August Pruitt, who had been convinced until his death that the world above ground was temporary. Raymond had said the county condemned it sometime in the 1960s, declared it structurally unsound. Nobody had gone near it since. Edna Me got her flashlight from the kitchen drawer. She pulled on her coat. She tucked the silver thimble more firmly onto her right index finger. She had noticed she was wearing it again and could not remember putting it on, and she went out the back door into the cold. She had made her decision. The gravel path from the back of the house to the north pasture had not been maintained in decades, and November had done what November does to neglected ground. The stones had sunk or vanished, and what remained was a track of packed earth and dead grass that crunched faintly under her boots as she walked. The air was 38 degrees and carried the smell of creek water and leaf rot and something mineral underneath it, a deep coolness that Edna Mee associated with limestone and underground things, the smell that rises from caves on warm days in reverse, pouring out cold when the surface above is cold. She crossed the pasture, ducking under the single strand of rusted wire that was all that remained of the old fence line. The grass here was brown and knee-high and wet with morning damp that had never fully dried in the shadow of the tree line. Her boots were thoroughly soaked by the time she reached the slope of the hill. The door was set into the hillside at roughly a 45-degree embankment, which meant you approached it from below and had to look up slightly to see it. It was made of iron, or had been made of iron at some point, before decades of weather had converted it into a sheet of compressed rust the color of dried blood. It was rectangular, perhaps 4 feet wide and 5.5 feet tall, set into a frame of poured concrete that had cracked along the top edge and allowed a thick vine of Virginia creeper to root itself directly into the gap. The vine was bare now in November, its tendrils gray and brittle, rattling faintly in the wind. There was no handle visible, only a pair of hinges on the left side, swollen with rust into solid masses, and where a lock might once have been, there was now a corroded plate and the suggestion of a keyhole, long since frozen. The door had not been opened in a very long time. Edna Mee put her palm flat against it. The metal was cold enough to ache through her glove. She pushed and nothing happened. She noticed then at the base of the door that the concrete sill had crumbled at one corner, not from decay, or not only from decay. The crumble pattern was different there, more intentional, as though someone had once worked at it with a chisel. She crouched and looked more closely. The gap at the base was perhaps 2 inches high and 4 inches wide. Through it came a breath of air, not the same cold as the air around her. Warmer, dry. And carrying a smell she had never encountered precisely, but recognized the category of immediately: old paper, old wood, the dense, settled smell of a sealed space that had held its breath for 60 years. She stood up and aimed the flashlight at the hinges. They were, as she had expected, completely seized. But the frame, she walked the perimeter of the door carefully, pressing her fingers into the edges. The frame had shifted. The concrete had settled and pulled slightly away from the iron on the right side, creating a gap that was perhaps half an inch at the middle and wider at the bottom, not wide enough to enter, wide enough to suggest the frame had moved. She went back to the house and spent 20 minutes in the barn looking at Walter's tools. She found a flat pry bar, a claw hammer, a can of penetrating oil that had to be more than 15 years old but was still sealed, and a length of chain with a hook on one end. She also found, in the corner of the barn beside a stack of old feed bags, a hand-cranked cable winch that Walter had used years ago to pull a tractor out of mud. She brought all of it back to the door. She worked through the afternoon. She was a small woman, 5 feet 3 inches, with hands that had developed their own kind of authority from decades of handling books, tools, garden stakes, and everything else a woman handles alone when the situation requires it. She soaked the hinges with the penetrating oil, working the nozzle into every gap she could find, and let it sit for 40 minutes while she cleaned leaves and debris from the base of the door with a stick. Then she worked the pry bar into the right edge of the frame, not the door itself, but the frame, and applied slow, steady pressure. She could feel the concrete resist and then, incrementally, give, the way things give when they have been still long enough that the very act of movement surprises them. The gap on the right widened, not by much, perhaps 3/4 of an inch. It took her 2 more hours of this, working the pry bar at different heights along the frame, resetting, applying pressure, listening to the groan of the iron. At some point, the daylight shifted toward early dusk, and she realized she had lost track of time entirely, which was itself a kind of relief. She was not thinking about Dale or Renee or Garrett Prout or the lien on her property. She was thinking about leverage. She had just seated the hook of the chain into the crack on the right edge, looping the other end around a large oak tree 20 feet behind her and rigging the cable winch between, when she heard footsteps on the gravel. It was Amos Treadwell, her neighbor from 3/4 of a mile down the road. He was 67 years old, retired from 30 years of general contracting, with hands the size of dinner plates and a habit of showing up when his radar, which was calibrated to the specific frequency of a woman doing a man's work alone, went off. He had a bag of tools in one hand and a thermos in the other. He stopped at the fence line and looked at the winch setup. the pry bar leaning against the hillside, the mud on Edna Me's boots and jacket, and the rust on her gloves, and said nothing for a moment. "I'll get the other end," he said finally. He did not ask what she was doing or why. He crossed the pasture, set down his thermos and bag, and positioned himself at the winch crank. Together, over the next 40 minutes, they applied slow and steady tension to the chain while Edna Me worked the pry bar in turn at 3 different points along the frame. The iron complained. The creeper vine tore loose in sections, falling in dry rattles. The concrete cracked further along the top seam. And then, with a sound like a gunshot followed by a drawn-out groan of surrendering metal, the right side of the door swung outward from the frame by 8 inches, stopped, then swung another 4 as the hinges, the left ones, the ones with any purchase left, ground on their pins and held. The gap was enough. Edna Me shone her flashlight in. The beam fell on a concrete corridor approximately 5 feet wide and 7 feet tall, its walls smooth and damp dark, leading away into the hillside at a slight downward angle. The floor was dusty concrete, dry in the center and damp at the edges where moisture had crept in over the years. Wooden shelving units lined both walls, old construction, 2x4 frames and rough-cut boards, many of the boards bowed and sagging but intact. The shelves held objects she could not immediately identify from the doorway: glass jars with lids, metal canisters, stacks of flat rectangular things wrapped in oilcloth. The smell came out thick and immediate: old paper, old wood, the faint metallic sweetness of dust that has not been disturbed, and underneath it something she could not name, a deeper smell, a mineral smell, cool and ancient, and coming from somewhere further in than the corridor. "I'm not coming inside," Amos said from behind her. "Bad back, but I'll stay out here." She nodded. She stepped through the gap. The temperature inside was noticeably warmer than outside, perhaps 52 degrees, she estimated. The corridor ran approximately 40 feet before ending in a second door, this one wooden, which stood slightly ajar. She moved slowly, keeping the flashlight ahead of her, and did not touch anything. She reached the wooden door and pushed it carefully. It moved on its hinges with almost no resistance, as though it had been opened recently, though she knew that was impossible. On the other side was a larger space, a room, perhaps 15 feet square, with the same smooth concrete walls and a ceiling of poured concrete supported by 4 thick wooden posts, each post showing a band of moisture stain about 2 feet from the floor, the old high-water mark of a flood that must have passed through decades ago. The posts had darkened and hardened at the moisture line, but above it the wood was dry and firm. The room held a workbench along the left wall, a rusted metal chest, trunk-sized, with a combination dial on its front face, the rubber gasket around its lid long since crumbled, a wooden rack floor to ceiling holding glass mason jars in a dozen varieties, their contents dried to dust or crystals or nothing recognizable, a card table with a folding metal chair beside it, both coated in fine gray dust. On the table, a kerosene lantern was without fuel, a tin cup. And beside the cup, weighted down by the cup, a folded piece of paper. She photographed everything before she touched a single item. She used her cell phone, moving methodically, taking 37 photographs in total: the corridor, the shelves, the second door, the room from each corner, then close-ups of every significant object. She photographed the folded paper without opening it. She photographed the metal chest, the workbench, and the mason jars. Then she photographed the floor. It was the floor that she had nearly missed. The concrete flooring in the main corridor was smooth and unbroken, but here in the room she noticed in the raking angle of the flashlight that the floor was not entirely uniform. There was a seam, not a crack, not a joint, a seam, the deliberate kind, running in a rectangle roughly 4 feet by 6 feet in the northwest corner of the room. She crouched and ran her fingernail along it. The seam was tight, but it was cut, not broken. And at one end, set flush with the surface so that it would be invisible in ordinary light, was a small iron ring, folded flat into a recess in the concrete. Her hands were steady when she reached for it. The ring lifted with almost no friction. It had been greased with something that had long since congealed to a waxy residue, but the mechanism beneath it still functioned. She pulled. The section of flooring, it was concrete over a wooden frame, she understood now. A hatch rose in a single piece with a weight that made her adjust her grip and brace her knees. It came up on a piano hinge, and she held it vertically for a moment before resting it against the wall. Beneath the hatch was a wooden staircase, 6 steps, leading down into darkness. The smell that rose from below was different from the room above: stone, cold, the specific mineral smell of water moving through limestone, and something else, something metallic and ancient and heavy. She photographed the open hatch and the top of the stairs. Then she descended. The space below was not a room in any conventional sense. It was a natural limestone cavity, a cave, or the beginning of one, that had been partially shaped by human hands. The walls cleared and smoothed at head height, the floor leveled with poured concrete that followed the original contour of the cave floor without completely covering it. The ceiling was natural limestone, gray and irregular, studded with the blunt beginnings of stalactites that had had their growth interrupted, she guessed, when the concrete floor was poured and the humidity changed. The temperature here was cooler, perhaps 48 degrees. The mineral smell was much stronger. Her breath came in faint clouds. The flashlight caught the far wall. Built into it, not placed against it, not set on a shelf, but actually set into the limestone wall during construction, the surrounding rock mortared to accommodate it, was a stone vault. Rectangular, perhaps 3 feet wide by 2 feet tall by 2.5 feet deep, sealed with a door of what appeared to be solid iron, this one still equipped with a working lever handle and a keyed lock plate. The lock was not frozen. The lock plate moved slightly under her thumb. She did not open it yet. She stood and looked at it for a long time, the flashlight beam steady on the vault door, and felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest from the inside, not fear, not excitement exactly, something quieter, the feeling of standing at the edge of something very large. Then she went back up the stairs, climbed out of the bunker, and photographed everything again. She photographed the hatch from above. She photographed her own footprints in the dust of the corridor on the way out. Amos was sitting on the hillside with his thermos. "There's a cave," she said, "a natural one, under the bunker. Someone built a vault into the wall." He looked at her for a moment. "Did you open it?" "Not yet," she said. He was quiet. He poured her coffee from the thermos without asking and held it out to her. She accepted it with both hands. "You'll need someone with you when you do," he said. "A witness." "I know," she said. She came back the next morning with Amos and with Marvell Dunstan, 81 years old, the former Polk County amateur historian and the woman who had, for 30 years, known more about the recorded history of every piece of property in this county than the county itself did. Marvell walked slowly with a cane, but she moved with the deliberate certainty of someone who has learned that speed was never the point. Marvell stood at the vault door for a long moment, studying the construction. She touched the mortar work around the edge of the vault with her fingertips. "This was built when the bunker was built," she said. "The mortar matches. Whoever built the bunker built this into the cave wall at the same time." She paused. "You said the property was Prewitt's originally." "August Prewitt," Edna Mee said. "My father told me." Marvell pressed her lips together and said nothing, which meant she was thinking something significant. They photographed the vault door. Then Edna Mee took the key from the chain around her neck. She had found it the previous night. On the folded paper, she had finally allowed herself to pick up and examine without opening, where it was taped to the outside of the fold, and she placed it in the lock. The key turned without resistance. The tumblers moved with the smooth certainty of a precision mechanism that had been built to last. She opened the vault. The interior was dry perfectly, inexplicably dry. There was no moisture, no rust, no decay. Whatever the original owner had used to seal this space had held for 80 years. On the inside surface of the vault door, a leather gasket ran the full perimeter, brittle but intact. On the shelves of the vault, 3 shelves, each perhaps 10 inches deep, lay the following. On the top shelf, a stack of documents in a leather portfolio, the leather dried and cracked, but the portfolio sealed with a brass clasp that opened cleanly. Inside, 8 sheets of paper, folded in thirds, property deeds. She did not read them immediately, but she could see the stamp of the Polk County Register of Deeds on the top sheet, and she could see, with the flashlight, that the total acreage described in the first deed was listed as 47.3 acres, adjacent to and east of the Beaumont parcel. She photographed every page before touching it further. On the middle shelf, a flat wooden box approximately 12 inches by 8 with a fitted lid. She lifted the lid. Inside, resting in individual formed depressions lined with what had once been red velvet and was now a faded burgundy, were coins, gold coins. She counted them, 32 in the front row, 32 in the back row, 64 in total. Each coin was the size of a $50. She recognized the design on the face, Liberty head, the old kind. She did not touch them yet. Beside the coin box, a canvas pouch tied at the neck. She untied it carefully. Inside were what she understood to be silver certificates, paper currency, old bills, folded in thirds, 23 of them. She counted by holding each up to the flashlight. The denominations were mixed, but she could see the word silver certificate printed across the top of each. On the bottom shelf, a smaller pouch, this one of oilcloth. She opened it and turned it carefully over her palm. Out tumbled stones, cut gemstones, she believed, though she would not claim certainty, in 7 pieces. 2 red, 3 blue, 2 that were clear or nearly clear. They caught the flashlight and threw small fragments of color across the limestone wall. And finally, on the bottom shelf, tucked against the back of the vault and wrapped in 2 layers of brown wax paper, a handwritten inventory, 4 pages numbered in the corner in a precise and legible hand. Every item listed. Every item is described. Edna Mee read the first line. Property of August Warren Prewitt, assembled 1943-1947, for safekeeping until it can be given to its rightful recipient. God willing, she will know what to do with it. Marvell, standing behind her, read over her shoulder. She, Marvell said softly. Edna Mee did not respond. She rewrapped the inventory, photographed it, and set it carefully back in the vault. She stood up from her crouch and pressed her hand flat against the limestone wall for a moment, steadying herself. All right, she said. She climbed the stairs, walked out of the bunker, and drove directly to the Polk County Courthouse to speak to a property attorney. The attorney Edna Mee reached on the telephone that afternoon was a woman named Patricia Showalter, 53 years old, who ran a small practice out of an office on Main Street in Benton and was known in Polk County for 2 things: a meticulous approach to property law and an absolute refusal to be hurried by anyone. She listened to Edna Mee's account for 11 minutes without speaking, asked 4 precise questions, and said, "Don't touch anything else until I've seen it. And you need a professional appraiser. Get me a numismatist with estate credentials, not a coin shop, a certified appraiser." "How do I find one?" Edna Mee asked. "I'll make a call," Patricia said. "Give me 48 hours. Patricia Showalter had handled 2 estate cases involving historical coin collections in the preceding decade, and she knew the difference between an appraisal and an opinion. She called a colleague in Chattanooga who gave her the name of Dr. Calvin Reese. Dr. Calvin Arthur Reese, 61 years old, certified by the American Society of Appraisers and the Professional Numismatists Guild, with a faculty appointment in material culture at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and a resume that included expert testimony in 4 federal estate cases. He had appraised collections ranging from small personal accumulations to a single wartime gold hoard valued at over $2 million. Patricia made the call herself. Dr. Reese arrived at the Beaumont property on November 12, 2024, driving a dark blue Subaru and carrying a hard-sided case the size of a large briefcase that contained his appraisal tools. He was a compact man with wire-rimmed glasses and a careful, unhurried quality to his movements that Edna Mee found immediately trustworthy. He did not demonstrate expertise. He simply had it. Patricia was already there. Amos had come again, at Edna Mee's request, to provide the mechanical assistance of reopening the bunker's iron door all the way, which he accomplished with a portable hydraulic jack and approximately 90 minutes of careful work. They descended together, Edna Mee, Dr. Reese, and Patricia. The attorney photographed everything with her own phone, in addition to the photographs Edna Mee had already taken. Dr. Reese carried his own portable LED lighting system, which he set up in the underground room before they descended the hatch stairs. In the limestone cave, he set up a second portable light, a folding examination mat, and a set of jeweler's tools. He opened the vault. He stood in front of it for approximately 30 seconds without speaking. Edna Mee, standing to his left, watched his face in the LED light. He went very still. It was the specific stillness of a professional who has spent 30 years preparing for a moment and is now in it and is taking care not to disturb it. "All right," he said, in a voice that was barely altered from his ordinary speaking tone. "I'm going to need you to let me work quietly for a while." He spent 4 hours in the cave. He examined the coins first, using a loupe, cotton gloves, and a flat black mat. He handled each coin individually, turning it in the light, checking the edges, and recording notes in a small notebook. The Liberty Head gold coins, he explained when he finally spoke, were double eagles, $20 gold pieces minted between 1907 and 1933. The specific variety he was examining bore the St. Gaudens design, widely considered the most beautiful American coin ever produced. "In the condition you have here," he said, holding one up to the LED light, "a single coin of this type in grade retails between $1,800 and $2,200 at auction. The grade on most of these," he paused, turning the coin, "is conservatively MS62, possibly MS63, 64 of them." He set the coin down carefully and wrote in his notebook. The silver certificates he examined next. They were large format notes, the old kind, 1923 issues, primarily in denominations of $1 and $5. They were in remarkable condition, preserved by the dry vault and the waxed paper wrapping. Collectors' certificates of this age and condition, he explained, carried a premium far above their face value. The 1923 silver dollar certificates in fine or better condition had been trading at between $130 and $185 per note at recent auction, depending on the specific series and the serial number. He examined each note. 3 of the $5 notes were in near-perfect condition. These 3 alone, he said, showing Edna me, would likely bring $3,500 to $4,500 at auction. The full set, conservatively, between $4,000 and $6,000. He moved to the gemstones. This was where his silence grew longest. He used a diamond tester, a refractometer, and a loupe with a strong LED. He tested each stone twice. When he looked up at Edna me, his expression had shifted in some small, controlled way. The 2 red stones are rubies, he said. Natural, not synthetic. One of them has an inclusion pattern consistent with Burmese origin, which for a stone of this size and color is significant. The 3 blue stones are sapphires, 2 of them very fine, one of good quality. The 2 clear stones are diamonds. One is approximately 1.1 carats, the other closer to 1.4. He paused. For the gemstones, I'll give you preliminary numbers, which I want to revise upward after laboratory confirmation. The rubies together, conservatively, I'd put at 40 to 60,000. The sapphires, 25 to 40,000. The diamonds, he stopped. He set down the 1.4 carat diamond very slowly. That one alone I would not sell for less than 18,000, and I would argue for considerably more. Edna me sat on the folding mat. Patricia was writing. Dr. Reese looked at his notebook. He reviewed his figures. He looked at Edna me over his glasses. I want to tell you the low end and the high end of this collection as I currently understand it, he said. The low end, taking every item at the most conservative recent auction comparables, I would put this collection at $340,000. He waited a moment. The high end, if the rubies perform well and if the coin grades hold under independent certification, is closer to $490,000. Edna me pressed her hand flat against the limestone wall. She sat that way for a long moment. The cold of the stone came through her palm. What is it actually worth? She said, in the tone of someone who needs a number, not a range. Dr. Reese considered. In my professional opinion, after certification and a well-managed auction process, I would tell you to plan for $420,000. It could exceed that. I would be surprised if it fell meaningfully below. Edna me felt the air go out of her chest quietly, not dramatically, the way a window finally unseals when the pressure changes. She looked at the vault in the wall. He built this in 1943, she said, not quite a question. The construction is consistent with that era, Dr. Reese said. She nodded once, then she stood up, smoothed her jacket, and asked Patricia what they needed to do next. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Word reached Dale Calloway on November 19th, 16 days after the kitchen table meeting, through a woman named Carla Sims, who worked as an administrative assistant at the Polk County Courthouse and who had gone to high school with Renee Calloway Pitts and still exchanged text messages with her on birthdays and holidays. Carla had noticed Patricia Showalter filing a title search request on the Beaumont parcel, which was not unusual in itself, but she had also noticed, at the bottom of the filing, a request for historical deed records dating to 1940, which was unusual, and she had mentioned it to Renee the following afternoon in a text message that said only, "Your mom's attorney is doing something interesting with the Beaumont property. Just FYI." Renee called Dale that same evening. Dale called a real estate attorney friend of his in Cookeville, Tennessee, named Brad Folsom, who ran informal property searches as a personal favor in exchange for golf outings. Brad Folsom discovered the title activity, and through a combination of courthouse contacts and the simple fact that Verbena Creek was a very small place, learned enough of the general shape of what Edna me had found to call Dale back with a voice that carried a new kind of attention. "Whatever it is, you want to be in the room," Brad told him. Dale called his mother that Friday morning. His voice on the phone was warm in a way she had not heard since Walter's funeral, the specific warmth of someone who has reviewed their strategy and made a correction. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "Renee and I pushed too hard last time. We just got worried about you. Can we come by? Just no paperwork, no pressure. I'll bring lunch." She looked out the window at the November sky. "Sunday works," she said. They arrived on Sunday at noon, both of them carrying a bag from the deli in Benton. They sat at the same kitchen table. Dale set the deli bag down and moved her papers aside first, carefully, and she noted the difference. Renee complimented the soup she had not started making. Dale asked about the library, the way he had not asked about anything in years. The performance was thorough, and it was not entirely without warmth. There was in it, perhaps, some genuine regret, some flicker of the children they had actually been when they were small, and she had read to them on winter evenings. She did not mistake the flicker for the fire. 35 minutes in, Dale set down his fork and said, "Mom, we heard there might be something going on with the property, with some discovery." She waited. "We're your family," Renee said. "Whatever you found, we want to help." "We could manage the whole process for you," Dale said, "the legal stuff alone." "Patricia Showalter is managing the legal process," Edna Mee said. A brief silence. "She's a small-town attorney," Dale said. "For something this size, you need." "She's doing fine," Edna Mee said. The warmth in Dale's expression had the same quality as weather that changes without quite committing to rain. He looked at Renee. Renee looked at her hands. "Mom," Renee said, in a voice that was lower now, the performance largely over, "we just want you to understand that as your children, as Walter's children, we have an interest here." "You are not Walter's children," Edna Mee said. "You are my children. This property is mine." The silence after that was of a different kind. They left an hour later, the deli bag still on the counter, most of the food still in it. Edna Mee wrapped the remaining sandwich, put it in the refrigerator, and went to the window and stood there until she heard both cars leave. 2 weeks later, on November 30th, a Saturday, a certified letter arrived from a law firm in Chattanooga, Callaway, Briggs & Associates. The envelope was addressed to Edna Mee Beaumont Callaway, and the return address was that of an attorney named Marcus Greer. Inside was a formal notice of claim. The notice was signed by Harlan Callaway. It stated in the language of legal documents stripped of everything but assertion that Harlan Callaway was the surviving senior member of the Callaway family, and that as such he held a recognized familial interest in any property or property improvements associated with the Callaway name, and that he would be proceeding to establish a formal legal claim to 50% of the fair market value of any discovery or treasure found on what the notice referred to as the Callaway Associated Parcel, which was the Beaumont property, the property Edna Mee had inherited from her mother, the property that had never been a Callaway property in any legal document ever filed in Polk County. He was claiming it on the basis of the Callaway name. He was also, and this was the part Patricia Showalter would address most directly, suggesting that the documents found in the vault might constitute proceeds of a property that predated the Beaumont family's ownership and should therefore be subject to a divided claim. Additionally, and in the same envelope, was a separate letter from Dale and Renee Callaway, co-signed, also prepared by Marcus Greer, indicating that as Edna Mee's children and therefore Walter Callaway's heirs, they were requesting joint custodianship of any discovered assets pending legal resolution. Edna Mee read both letters at the kitchen table in the early morning light. She made coffee, she made toast, she read the letters a second time. Then she called Patricia Showalter. Patricia listened to the entire reading of both letters without interrupting. When Edna Mee finished, there was a moment of silence on the line. "All right," Patricia said, "let me explain why this is going to fail, and then let me explain what we're going to do about it." She spent 40 minutes walking Edna Mee through the legal framework. The Beaumont property had been in the Beaumont family since 1921, when Edna Mee's grandparents purchased it through a deed registered in Polk County. Edna Mee had inherited it directly from her mother Vera Beaumont through a clearly executed will probated in 2004. Walter Callaway had never held title to the property and had disclaimed interest in it at the time of their marriage. Per a signed document in the county records that Walter himself had prepared because, Patricia said with a measured appreciation for the man, Walter Callaway had understood property law and his own family considerably well. As for Harlan Callaway's claim of familial interest in a Callaway-associated parcel, Patricia's tone on the phrase was precisely calibrated to indicate what she thought of it without saying it. This had no standing under Tennessee property law. A family name did not constitute a property interest. The claim was a pressure tactic, not a legal argument. "He's hopping, you'll settle," Patricia said. "I won't," Edna Mee said. "I know," Patricia said. "Here's what I need from you." She listed 8 specific things: the original deed to the Beaumont property, the probated will, Walter's disclaimer document, the full photographic record of the discovery, Dr. Reese's preliminary appraisal, the handwritten inventory from the vault, the title search results, and the geological survey records, which Marvell Dunstan had by this point, located in the Polk County Historical Archives. A 1924 geological survey of the Beaumont and Prewitt parcels by a University of Tennessee geologist named Harold Shea, which documented the limestone cave system in precise detail and identified it as located entirely within the boundaries of the Beaumont parcel. Edna Mee delivered all 8 items to Patricia's office the following Tuesday. She carried them in a manila folder in a tote bag. She wore her good coat and the silver thimble on her right index finger. She sat across from Patricia's desk and listened to the attorney outline the response to both claims and the legal hearing date that had been set for December 17, 2024, in Benton. On the way home from the attorney's office, she stopped at the Verbena Creek Public Library, the building she had run for 37 years, the building that still smelled of old paper and floor wax, and the particular comfort of a space that belongs to everyone, and she sat in a chair in the periodicals section for 20 minutes, alone, reading nothing. When she stood up to leave, the young librarian, a woman named Claire Hewitt who had trained under Edna Mee and still called her Miss Edna when she thought no one was listening, looked at her with an expression that held more questions than it asked. December 17th, Edna Mee said, which was all the answer she offered. She drove home and made supper. The hearing in the matter of Callaway v. Callaway Beaumont, et al., the caption itself, Patricia had noted, was a small legal statement of the mess the opposition had created, was held in Courtroom 2 of the Polk County Courthouse on December 17, 2024, before the Honorable Judge Clifton Haverford, who had served on the Polk County bench for 19 years and who was known for 2 qualities in equal measure: his reluctance to allow theatrics and his considerable patience with people who could not tell the difference between a legal argument and a personal grievance. He was 64 years old, with steel gray hair and reading glasses he wore on a chain around his neck that he put on each time a document was placed before him and removed each time he looked up at the room. He had the particular face of a man who has seen every variety of human foolishness and has made peace with it. The courtroom held approximately 40 seats. Every seat was occupied. This surprised Marcus Greer, who had apparently not anticipated the degree to which Verbena Creek's residents had taken an interest in the proceedings. They had come quietly, most of them, and sat without visible partisanship, but their presence was a statement in itself. The retired schoolteacher from Edna Mee's former school who sat in the 3rd row, the woman from the deli who had served Edna Mee every Tuesday for 20 years, the retired pastor from the Methodist Church who had known Walter Callaway since childhood, Amos Treadwell in the 4th row with his hands folded. Marvell Dunstan beside him, with her cane hooked over the back of the seat in front of her. Dale and Renee sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus Greer, a large man in an expensive suit who moved papers with the confidence of someone accustomed to rooms that do not know him yet. Harlan Callaway sat beside Renee, a thin man, 79 years old, with a yellow-white mustache and the expression of someone who has convinced himself that presence confers right. His wife Judith sat in the gallery directly behind him, in a wool coat the color of dried moss, with her hands in her lap and a look that she perhaps imagined was aristocratic dignity. Edna Mee sat at the respondent's table with Patricia Showalter. She wore the same good coat she had worn to the attorney's office. She sat with her hands on the table and looked straight ahead. Judge Haverford opened the session at 9:15 in the morning and immediately established the tone of the proceeding by removing his glasses, looking at Marcus Greer's initial statement, and saying, "Counsel, you filed a claim of familial interest and a claim of predatory discovery. I've read your brief. I want you to understand that my patience for arguments without supporting statute is very limited this morning." Marcus Greer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the Callaway family has a long established—" "I'm going to stop you," Judge Haverford said and put his glasses on. "I've read the deed history of the Beaumont parcel. I want the documents establishing Walter Callaway's ownership interest in that parcel, please." "There are no documents, Your Honor, as we stated in—" "Because there is no ownership interest," the judge said. He removed his glasses. He looked at Patricia Showalter. "Counselor, your documentation on the Beaumont chain of title." Patricia stood and delivered, in order. The original 1921 deed of purchase, the 1967 inheritance document from Raymond Beaumont to Vera Beaumont, the 2004 probated will from Vera Beaumont to Edna Mee Beaumont Callaway, Walter Calloway's signed disclaimer of interest executed in 1973, the current property tax records in Edna Mee's name, and the Polk County Assessor's official parcel boundary description, which matched precisely the boundaries described in the 1924 Geological Survey locating the limestone cave system within the Beaumont parcel. Judge Haverford reviewed each document. He placed his glasses on and off with the rhythm of a man who is building a case in his own mind as he reads. Marcus Greer argued for 45 minutes. He argued that the vault's contents constituted discovered treasure under Tennessee statute, and that as such, they were subject to equitable distribution. He argued that, as Walter Calloway's heirs, Dale and Renee had a derivative interest in any property improvements or additions made during the marriage. He argued that Harlan Calloway's standing as the senior surviving Calloway family member created a recognizable cultural claim under the spirit, if not the letter, of Tennessee property law. Judge Haverford let him finish. Then he said, "Are you arguing family sentiment as a property right?" Greer paused. "We're arguing. Because that is what this sounds like," the judge said, "and I want you to know that in 19 years on this bench, I have not found Tennessee statute to contain a provision for sentiment." There was a sound from the gallery. Judge Haverford looked up, and the sound stopped. He put his glasses on and returned to the documents. It was at this point that Marcus Greer attempted a maneuver that Patricia had, she told Edna Mee later, fully anticipated and was prepared for. "Your Honor," Greer said, standing, "we would like to submit to the court a matter of character relevant to the claim. It is the position of our clients that the discovery itself, the vault, the contents, may have been known to Mrs. Calloway prior to the reported date of discovery, and that the reported discovery date was manufactured too." "Are you suggesting fraud?" Judge Haverford said. "We're suggesting," Greer said carefully, "that the timeline bears examination." He submitted a signed statement from a man named Lester Pike, who described himself as a former handyman who had worked at the Beaumont property in 2017 and who claimed he had seen Edna Mee going back and forth to the North Hill with tools and acting secretive about the back pasture. Judge Haverford read the statement. He set it down. "Counselor Showalter," he said. Patricia stood. She submitted 5 items in response. The first was a county condemnation notice from 1964, formally declaring the bunker structurally unsafe and affixing a county seal to the door, a seal that appeared in full, unbroken, in the photographic record of Edna Mee's initial discovery. The county seal had been broken only when the door was opened on November 4, 2024. The second was a sworn statement from Amos Treadwell, who had been present for the opening and who described, in his plain and precise way, the condition of the door, the rust of the hinges, and the undisturbed state of the concrete floor inside. The third was Dr. Reese's certified appraisal, which included his professional opinion that the vault contents showed no evidence of having been opened or disturbed since their original sealing in the mid-1940s. The fourth was a sworn statement from Marvell Dunstan, identifying the county condemnation seal from the photograph as matching the 1964-era Polk County design, cross-referenced with the county's own historical records, which she had researched personally over 4 days. The fifth was a property access log from the county tax office, showing that no county official had entered the Beaumont North Hill parcel since 1964. She set these 5 items before the judge. Lester Pike's statement, as it turned out, could not survive the county seal. Judge Haverford read everything he had been given. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers being turned. Harlan Calloway sat with his jaw set. Judith sat behind him with her hands still in her lap. Dale had stopped looking at Marcus Greer. Renee was looking at the table. The judge removed his glasses and held them in one hand. "The claim filed by Mr. Harlan Calloway on behalf of the Calloway family interest is dismissed," he said. "There is no property right established, no contractual interest, and no statutory basis for the claim under Tennessee law. The sentiment is noted and has no legal effect." He paused. "The claim filed by Mr. Dale Calloway and Mrs. Renee Calloway Pitts as derivative heirs of Walter Calloway is dismissed." Mr. Walter Calloway disclaimed any property interest in the Beaumont parcel in writing in 1973. His heirs cannot claim what he legally declined. He paused again. "The Beaumont parcel, including all improvements, structures, and the cave system documented in the 1924 Polk County Geological Survey, belongs in its entirety to Mrs. Edna Mee Beaumont Calloway. The vault contents, discovered by Mrs. Calloway on her own property and documented as having been sealed since approximately 1945, are her lawful property under the Tennessee Treasure Trove statute. The matter is resolved." He set his glasses on the chain around his neck and stood. The room came alive slowly, not all at once, the way a field comes alive in spring, individual sounds first, then a general warmth. Edna Mee did not stand up immediately. She sat with her hands on the table for a moment, not looking at anyone in particular, doing the private work of receiving something you had worked hard for without letting the weight of it knock you sideways. Patricia placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. Not a word, just the hand. At the plaintiff's table, Marcus Greer began gathering papers. Harlan Calloway stood and walked past the gallery without looking at anyone. Judith followed him. They were not dramatic about it. That was the pathetic part. There was no dramatic defeat, no visible reckoning, just two old people in winter coats walking out of a room with nothing accomplished. Dale lingered at the table. He did not look at his mother for a long moment, and when he finally did, his face held an expression she did not have a word for. Not remorse exactly, not shame exactly, but some third thing in the same family. She looked back at him without performance. Then she looked away. Renee had left already. The exact confirmed total from the vault's contents, following the independent certification of the coins, the professional gemological laboratory analysis of the stones, and the auction conducted by a certified numismatic house in Nashville in February 2025, came to $447,213. This was not the highest estimate Dr. Reese had offered. It was not the lowest. It was what it was. The back taxes on the Beaumont parcel were paid in full the following Monday, along with all associated penalties, $9,847. The home equity line was settled, $26,000 paid in full to the collections account, with a note from Edna Mee's attorney that the debt would not be pursued against Dale. It was not a gift. It was a decision not to use a weapon. The first thing she did with the money, the very first expenditure, before the taxes, before the debt, before anything practical, was make a single purchase on a Tuesday morning in January, in a garden supply shop in Benton. She bought 6 rose bushes, 3 pink, 3 deep red. She had remembered that her mother, Vera's favorite flower was a red rose, and that August Prewitt's house, which had stood on the adjacent parcel before it burned in 1958, had been known throughout Verbena Creek for its rose garden. She did not explain this to anyone. She carried the rose bushes home in the back of the Buick, and she planted them along the south wall of the bunker entrance, in ground she had cleared by hand the week before. 6 months after the hearing in Courtroom 2, in June of 2025, when Polk County had finally come all the way through spring, the Beaumont property was recognizably itself again, which is to say it was recognizably alive. The delinquent taxes had been paid, the lien had been cleared, the legal fees had been paid, and with the remainder of the $447,213, Edna Mee had spent the winter and spring doing what she had always known needed to be done, which was simply to take care of things that had needed care for a long time. The roof of the house, which had been losing shingles since 2019, was replaced in January with 30-year architectural shingles in a color called weathered wood, chosen because it matched the original. She hired Amos Treadwell to manage the project, and he brought 2 of his former crew members, and they completed it in 3 days. She paid Amos at the full professional rate, which he tried to refuse, and she told him that she had not survived a legal battle to lose an argument with a contractor. He accepted. The south fence line, gone to rust and collapsed in 4 places, was replaced with cedar post and rail. The barn roof was resheeted and the doors rehung. The creek culvert under the back drive, which had been partially blocked since a flood in 2021, was cleared and reinforced with new concrete. Inside the house, the kitchen cabinets, original to a 1961 renovation, were sanded and repainted in a pale blue-gray that Vera Beaumont had once called the color of a good sky. The bathroom floor was retiled in white hexagonal tile, the old kind, because Edna Mee had a precise memory of the floor in her grandmother's house, and she had always meant to restore it. The back porch, where the boards had rotted in 3 places, was redecked with kiln-dried pine and a new screened surround so that summer evenings were usable again. The bunker was not destroyed. She had considered it and she had chosen differently. The iron door was properly restored, cleaned, treated, rehung on functioning hinges, and the interior was cleaned of its dust and damp, the sagging shelves removed, the walls dried and sealed. The room with the hatch was left substantially as it was, except for the installation of proper LED lighting and a clean wooden floor over the concrete. The vault was emptied of its contents, all now certified and either auctioned or secured, and left open, its door swung wide, the interior lit. Visitors could see it. because there were visitors now. This had not been Edna Me's idea, precisely, and it had not happened in any organized or deliberate way. It had happened because Marvell Dunstan had written a long piece about August Prewitt and the Beaumont land for the Polk County Historical Society newsletter, a 7-page account of Prewitt's life, his acquisition of the adjacent land, his Depression-era accumulation of gold and silver, his single recorded interview in a 1951 Chattanooga newspaper in which he had spoken about his belief that land was the only honest thing, and his death in 1961, childless. Having told no one about the vault, Marvell's piece ran in the January 2025 newsletter and was then picked up by a regional historical magazine, and the interest that followed was quiet but steady: phone calls, letters, 2 historians from the University of Tennessee who drove out in February to examine the geological survey records, and a steady trickle of curious visitors to Verbena Creek who stopped at the diner and asked about the woman on Beaumont Road. Edna Me allowed the visits, small groups by appointment, managed by Marvell, who in her 81st year had found something that suited her perfectly and was not going to be argued out of it. Marvell came twice a month on Saturdays and led groups of 4 to 8 people through the bunker and cave, narrating the history of August Prewitt in a voice that was authoritative and without sentimentality, and therefore moved people more than any performed emotion would have. The adjacent 47.3 acres, the parcel described in the deed found in the leather portfolio, had been claimed and registered in Edna Me's name in January. The land was primarily a wooded limestone ridge, unsuitable for cultivation, but extraordinary in its natural features. The cave system extended beneath it for nearly a quarter mile, documented now by the 2 UT geologists who had visited and submitted a formal report. There was a spring that had been running quietly on that land for as long as anyone could remember, and that no one had been able to account for. Now they could. It was June when Edna Me found the letter. She had not found it in November. She had put the folded paper in a cedar box on her dresser and had not opened it, not through the legal proceedings, not through the repairs, not through the winter. She had known somehow that the letter was not for those seasons. She brought it outside on a Thursday afternoon in late June, when the light was long and golden, and the shadows had turned amber across the north pasture. She sat in the wooden chair on the restored back porch for a while, holding the letter, before she went down the porch steps and walked out into the yard and sat in the grass at the edge of the garden her mother had planted and that she had kept alive imperfectly for 20 years. She faced west. The light came at her from a low angle, warm and serious. She opened the letter. It was written in the careful, practiced hand of someone who had spent time making each letter correctly. The ink was brown-black with age, faded to a sepia on the thinner strokes, still bold on the heavier ones. The paper was fine, a personal stationery pale cream, with a small printed heading at the top that read A.W. Prewitt, Verbena Creek, Tennessee. The date at the top was July 14, 1958. She read it. July 14, 1958. Dear Vera, I am writing this for your daughter, though she is only 8 years old and cannot read it yet. Perhaps by the time she does, she will understand what I mean. If she is anything like you, and I believe she will be, she will. I have known your family since before you and Raymond were married. I have watched you make something out of almost nothing for 30 years, and I have never once heard you complain that the ground was hard or the sky was difficult. There is a kind of person who earns their life quietly and gets very little credit for it, and you are that kind, and I suspect your Edna Me will be that kind too. I have no children. I have no one to leave the land to, or what I've put away in the cave beneath the old bunker. I've written it all down in the inventory, every item, the full count, the full weight. The key is in this letter. The adjacent land, the deeds are in the leather portfolio. It should have been Beaumont land from the start. Your father and mine were supposed to make that right years ago, and they never did. I'm making it right now. When I am gone, I hope the law is kinder than it sometimes is, but if it isn't, the documents are there. The truth of it is in writing. Hold on to what is yours. Your girl brought me a jar of your tomato preserves in the spring and stood on my porch in her muddy boots and told me very seriously that the label said they were the best in Polk County. I don't know if that was you or her, but either way, she was right about them. Take care of those rose bushes. They'll outlast the trouble. Your friend and neighbor, August Warren Prewitt. P.S. Tell Edna Me, when she is old enough, the good things are usually underground. You have to want them enough to dig. Edna Me sat in the grass with the letter in her hands until the sun was nearly gone. The garden held the last of the light. The rose bushes along the south face of the bunker path had put out their first buds that week, 3 pink, 3 deep red, and they held the amber light for a moment as the sky went to rose and then to the blue of early dark. She did not cry in the garden. She sat with it. She had been 8 years old with a jar of her mother's tomato preserves. She had stood on a stranger's porch in muddy boots and said the label. She did not remember it. She had been 8 years old in the summer of 1958, and a man she barely knew had been watching and had decided that the girl in the muddy boots was the kind of person he could trust with the things he valued most. She refolded the letter carefully. She put it back in the cedar box when she went inside. On the front of the cedar box, she placed a small brass label. Amos had made it for her, at her request, the previous month, without knowing what it was for. The label read, in letters he had stamped by hand, A.W. Prewitt, 1881-1961. He believed the good things were worth digging for. On the last Saturday of June, she opened the library she had started in the converted front room of the bunker, 10 feet by 12 cedar shelves that Amos had built, a reading chair by the window she had cut into the hillside, good light, and she put 147 books on the shelves. All of them had been her mother, Vera's. She had kept them in boxes for 20 years. She did not call it anything. There was a small sign by the door, no larger than a piece of notebook paper, that said, "Take one, leave one, or just read here. The light is good in the afternoon." The morning she finished the last of the organizing in the small library, she made coffee and brought it outside. She sat in a low chair beside the path between the house and the bunker. The garden was at her right. The hills rose to the north, limestone gray and green. A pair of cardinals moved through the rose bushes. The grass along the fence line needed cutting, and she would cut it on Thursday. The sky was clear and deep, and the kind of blue that only appears after a long rain. Edna Mee sat with her coffee and the silver thimble on her right index finger, the way she had sat many mornings, simply present, in her own life on her own land, under a sky that belonged to the whole of it and to no one. She was 74 years old. She had buried her mother and her husband. She had raised 2 children and spent 4 decades in service to a community that was made largely of ordinary people doing quiet, necessary things. She had survived the pressure, and the papers and the coffee ring on the death certificate, and the legal letter from a man who thought a name was a property right. She had a library the size of a spare room and 6 rose bushes, and $447,000 that had started with a hollow sound beneath a floor. And she had a letter from a man who had believed, 67 years ago, that a girl in muddy boots with a jar of preserves would grow up to be exactly the kind of person who would know what to do with it. He had been right. She finished her coffee. She set the mug on the arm of the chair. She looked out at the hills for a while, and then she stood up, went inside, and started on the day's ordinary things. There is a kind of person who earns their living quietly. The world does not always reward them first, but sometimes the ground has been holding what they are owed for a very long time, waiting for the right morning, the right flashlight, the right willingness to walk out into the cold and see what was always there. Edna Mee Calloway walked out into the cold, and she looked, and she found it. And that, more than the money, more than the vindication, more than anything that happened in a courtroom in December, that is the part worth carrying with you.